Hello, this is Sally Ducharme. I'm here to talk to you about an event that occurred on this day in astrology 52 years ago. This was the Battle of the Sexes, which was a tennis match between Billie Jean King, who was at that time the reigning women's champion in the United States, and Bobby Riggs, who had once been a champion but was now retired, but still very fit, still very into the game. Um, the events began around 1970. At that point, women started becoming a lot more vocal about the disparity in the pay that was given to women after playing tennis matches. Sometimes it was as far apart as like the men would be awarded $12,000 and women would be awarded $1,000. And women started protesting to the United States Lawn Tennis Association, the USLTA, and they said, well, not as many people come to watch women play tennis. And they said, well, the US Open just occurred and women had as many people in their audience as men did. And anyone enjoys seeing an athlete performing at the top of their game. There's a real joy in that. And so the women should be paid equally. And the powers that be would not listen. And so women eventually formed the Virginia Slims tournament, which is still in effect today, where women were competing and drawing good audiences, making good money. And so, in fact, the USLTA eventually had to come around and accept that, yes, women should be treated and paid equally on the circuit. And one of the main characters in this movement was Billie Jean King, who took a big risk in threatening expulsion at one point from the Tennis Association in order to play in the Virginia Slims tournament and trying to make the situation better for all women who are playing tennis. And so they were having some success. And by 1973, Bobby Riggs, who at that time was retired, he had gambled away all of his earnings from tennis, but very much was looking for a way to kind of get back in the game and refill his coffers. And so he started becoming very vocal about the importance of women knowing their place in tennis. He said, women can play a nice game of tennis, but only a man can be a true champion tennis player. He was a self-proclaimed male chauvinist pig, which was a term thrown around a lot in those days. And so in order to kind of keep this publicity train going and to build up interest and money, he challenged the reigning women of the day to a tennis match. And Billie Jean King, of course, just brushed him off. Thought, he was a self promoter. He was making a mockery out of the whole situation. But Margaret Court, who was also a champion at that time, accepted his challenge. And on Mother's Day in 1973, they had a big match. And unfortunately, Bobby Riggs just ate her lunch. She lost to him, went down hard. And so after that happened, he was crowing, and saying, I was right all along. And Billie Jean knew at that point that she had to step in. It was kind of, you look over your shoulder, who's going to do this? I guess it's on me. And so she did accept the challenge to meet him in Houston, Texas, in the Astrodome on September 20th, 1973. And as they decided to make a big show of this, and so Billie Jean arrived dressed as Cleopatra, being carried on a litter by four muscular men, and Billy and Bobby Riggs came in wearing a jacket that said "Sugar Daddy" on it, and he was pulled in a rickshaw by four beautiful models, and so it was a huge show, and the whole world was watching it. The match had 90 million viewers worldwide, 50 million of them in the United States. So this was a huge deal. And I was wondering, on this day, the battle of the sexes, what was going on in the sky? What were the planets doing on this day? And this is when astrology can just be so hilarious. We'll look at first the actual battle of the sexes. The match began at 6:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time in Houston. And so what is happening on this day? You think battle of the sexes, Venus and Mars, Venus representing women, Mars representing men. And what are Venus and Mars doing on that day? They are in opposition to each other, which, doesn't happen. It's not a common occurrence that it happens. It happens usually once a year in the sky. So isn't this fun that on the day of the battle of the sexes, we see Venus opposite Mars in the sky? And furthermore, we see that Venus has a bit of an edge. You think of an opposition as they're kind of in equal balance. They're kind of each pulling in different directions. They each have their own agenda. But in this case, we see that Venus is in Scorpio. Let me get that line out there so you can see it a little better. You see, Venus is in Scorpio, which is a sign of its detriment. So you think, oh, that's not too good for Venus. Venus rules Taurus. And so its opposite sign is Scorpio, where she's just not as able to bring about positive outcomes as she would be in her home sign of Taurus. But where is Mars? Mars is in its detriment. It's in the sign opposite Scorpio, which is a sign it rules. So it's not able to bring about its kind of what it wants to do in the world. And so both of them have a challenge, but this is what makes it interesting, because when there's an opposition between two planets and they're in each other's signs, Venus is in Mars's sign and Mars is in Venus' sign, that's called mutual reception. And so this is what tells us that even though they're battling out with each other, something is going to be mutually beneficial. And so this is what exactly happened. They both ended up getting a lot of publicity, boosting their careers, making money from this match. But who's going to win the match? Who's going to prevail? And so you can see that even though Venus and Mars apparently are on equal ground, Mars is stationing. You can see that little S there, getting ready to go retrograde. So there's sort of a stuck quality to Mars at this point, whereas Venus is, flying high in the sky. She's moving forward. And also we see that because Mars is going retrograde, Venus is going to overtake him fairly quickly. Also, we see that both planets have recently squared Jupiter. And Jupiter is especially important in this chart because it rules the midheaven of Sagittarius. And so Venus had, before the match begun, squared Jupiter, and Mars had as well. And if you look at the position of each square, which planet is in the superior position, you think that a planet that rises ahead of the other planet is going to be in the superior position of the square. It favors that planet in the outcome of the contest between them. And so a good way to understand which planet is a superior in a square is picture yourself standing right here in the middle of the chart and looking at this square. Which planet is on your right? That planet is in the superior position. But if you stand in the center of the chart and look towards Jupiter-Mars square, you can see Jupiter's on the right. It's in the superior position. So in this T-square, Venus has the superior position. We also see Venus is in above the horizon, so kind of up there in the sky, visible, whereas Mars has gone below the Earth. So you think about in the realm of spirits, aspiration, just kind of being out there in the world and shining. Venus has the upper hand over Mars that's kind of digging down and going beneath the Earth. We also see that Venus is making a trine to the ascendant. in this chart. She's moving towards that trine to the ascendant. And so that's another favorable aspect from Venus, for Venus in this chart, because Mars, remember, is going retrograde. So it's stationing and it's going retrograde. So even though it's only 2 degrees from the ascendant, it's moving away from a sextile to the ascendant. And again, if you look at this trine, Venus is in the superior position to the ascendant. So that's another clue that Venus is going to come out victorious in this match. So another sign of this symbols in this chart, which is also fun, is you see the moon has recently met with Saturn and the South Node, and it's kind of sailing on away from that conjunction. And so you think about Saturn, an older man, Bobby Riggs was 55 at the time. The moon, a younger woman, Billie Jean King was 29 at the time. But also, Saturn is kind of stuck there with the South Node, which shows the tide going out. And Saturn is not in a good sign. In Cancer, it's in the sign opposite from Capricorn, which it rules. So again, it has trouble bringing about its outcomes. Whereas, of course, the moon in Cancer is in its own sign. So she's just fully comfortable, able to gather all of her resources and move forward with this event. And also we like to track to see what the moon is doing over the next few hours. And we see that the moon has in the past made a sextile in trine to the Venus-Mars opposition, but that aspect is gone now. And so its next aspect is going to be a square to Uranus, which can show an upset, the young woman upsetting the system. But then also, we can see that eventually it's going to make a sextile to the sun, which is in the challenger would be the first house, the challenged would be the seventh house. So the moon making a sextile to the sun in the feminine sign of Virgo would again be a clue that the woman in this match is going to come out the victor. And we also see finally that Pluto, Saturn and Pluto are an exact square, which we're all friends with Saturn and Pluto, right? After 2020, we know how serious Saturn and Pluto can be when they're in aspect to each other. And so we see that Saturn and Pluto are not only in square to each other, which you think about a challenge to the powers that be with Saturn and Pluto, but you can see that it's aligned with the lunar nodes. And so that's a very fateful aspect. Also something that kind of comes into visibility or awareness on the earth. You think about the nodes as bringing visibility to something. So all of those suggest that the woman would, in this match, would succeed. And yes, that was the case. After some initial faltering, Billie Jean King, I think was behind initially in the first set, but she just kind of pushed her glasses up on her nose and understood what was at stake in this contest, and then played a brutal game and won all 3 sets. So this is some clues how you can look at the chart and see what the outcome was of the match. And before I leave this match, so I just wanted to take a look at the chart of the woman who succeeded in beating Billie Jean King, or beating Bobby Riggs in this match. The woman who was able to prove that women athletes could go onto the court, do an excellent job, and just stun the world. And so we see Billie Jean King's chart, and this is also very fun because you think of a woman who's defending other women and who's kind of holding up the torch for justice and fairness. What would she be except when she was born, Venus was flying overhead in this its own sign of Libra. And so fairness, justice, and just the power of the woman to be excellent is very much there. And then of course with Neptune bringing the spiritual dimensions to it, more of an abstract. She wasn't fighting just for herself, but for women, the right of women to be recognized and treated fairly in the sport. And of course, the moon's coming along at that time to join all the Libra planets. So this is just a beautiful aspect for someone who would, for her whole life, really champion causes for women. But also we see in the chart that she had um, a lot of grit because when Mars and Saturn come together in a chart, that that aggression, that fighting, that determinate, that putting yourself out there, taking on challenges of Mars is joined, they're kind of yoked with Saturn, which shows persistence, patience, determination. So the two together in the sixth house of hard work, of serving your time, of patiently, working yourself into a skill or an ability. All of those are in her chart. And of course, what is Venus doing while it's flying across the sky? It's applying to that Saturn Mars conjunction. So you can see that she was able to channel all of that discipline and energy, and of course in the sign of Gemini too, which is the hands and the arms, into just a really stellar career. And a career that set a shining example for other women to follow. And also, again, superior position. If you're standing in the middle of the chart looking at this trine, you see that Mars and Saturn are in the superior position. So she's able to take that grit and apply it to this. Really, a good tennis game you think about is like being like a work of art that is just played so brilliantly. And we also see that she's got um, that Pluto North Node conjunction, which again tells us that she's, there's almost something fateful about her challenge to the powers that be. And of course, Mercury is applying by trine to that um, Pluto North Node. And of course, the moon and Neptune are also applying by sextile. So we've got that beautiful minor grand trine in her chart. And so we can also see on the day that of the tennis match, let's see, we'll just briefly put up the two charts together, that she was having some wonderful aspects. Bobby Riggs, as you can guess, was not having very good aspects on that day. But you see some different things happening. I love that Jupiter here in the chart is positioned to trine her Libra moon and Neptune. And so you can see that. And she has in her chart a Uranus, which helped bring her fame and fortune, in trine to her moon and Neptune. And so Jupiter was creating a grand trine in her chart on that day. And then fatefully, the Venus-Mars opposition, which is just so fun, was falling across her nodal or falling in square to her nodal axis. So you can see that. So again, very fateful. And then Venus is in her 11th house of hopes and aspirations. So again, that Venus is at an advantage over Mars in her own chart as well. but you can see just hooked into this nodal axis with Pluto, that great challenge to the powers that be, was happening in her chart on that day. And then finally, the sun loves to be in the ninth house. That's the house of its joy. So the sun was floating through her ninth house, and it was an exact trine to her ascendant. So it's like the force was with her on that day as well. So if you think about the impact of this battle of the sexes, there were others, after this, and there had been actually some before, but this was a turning point for the recognition of women in sports, or women, especially women in tennis. And Billie Jean King would go on to have a stellar career, many wins, many awards, much money. And she would eventually form a Billie Jean King Foundation, which was its mission statement was to support the next generation of leaders through sports, education, and activism. And in that foundation, she's raised to date over $100 million. So out of this kind of showman schmaltzy like battle of the sexes emerged some really great work in the world. And I want to end by saying thank you, Billie Jean King, and for the many years that you gave to sports, to women, and to all of us. Take care. Bye-bye.